What if five men built the most authentic sound in rock history, only to watch it tear them apart, three voices destroyed by heroin, while one man claimed the songs and walked away rich? A farewell concert disguised as abandonment, bankruptcy while royalty checks flowed to one name, and a death in a Florida motel. Found by the friend who once harmonized beside him for decades. This is how the band became a brotherhood, broken by fame. The story doesn't begin in Woodstock or on some grand stage. It begins in the sweat-soaked bars and roadhouses of 1960s Canada, where five young men were grinding out a living under the tutelage of a rockabilly legend named Ronnie Hawkins. They called him the Hawk, and he had an eye for raw talent that rivaled John Mayall himself. Hawkins recruited them one by one. First came Levon Helm, a cotton farmer's son from Arkansas with a drummer's sense of timing that was almost primal. Then four Canadians, Robbie Robertson on guitar, Rick Danko on bass, Richard Manuel on piano, and Garth Hudson on organ and accordion. Together, they became the Hawks. And what Hawkins did was simple but brutal. He put them on the road and kept them there, night after night, town after town, playing covers and originals until their fingers bled and their voices gave out. This wasn't some romantic artist's retreat. This was boot camp. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Levon Helm would later recall those early years with a mix of exhaustion and joy. We were in our early 20s, playing and traveling, and didn't have to answer to anybody. It was the kind of life where if you had a problem today, you could be 500 miles away from it the next day. That freedom forged something rare. 5 distinct personalities, 5 different musical backgrounds, all melting into a single telepathic unit. They weren't trying to be stars. They were trying to be great. What made them special wasn't technical perfection. It was the way they listened to each other, the way Helm's Arkansas drums anchored Danko's melodic bass, the way Robertson's guitar lines wove through Manuel's gospel-tinged piano, the way Hudson's organ filled every space without overwhelming. They were a democracy in the truest sense, 5 equal voices creating something none of them could achieve alone. This was the bond, the brotherhood, the foundation of everything they would become. And it was built in obscurity, where egos couldn't survive, and only the music mattered. But one partnership would change everything. In 1965, Bob Dylan made a decision that would define a generation and drag the Hawks directly into the center of a cultural firestorm. Dylan was abandoning his acoustic folk roots. He was going electric, and he needed a band tough enough to withstand the backlash. He chose the Hawks. The 1966 World Tour became one of the most controversial musical events of the 20th century. Dylan would perform the first half of each concert solo with an acoustic guitar, giving the folk purists what they wanted. Then the second half would begin, and the Hawks would take the stage behind him for an electric set that felt like betrayal to the true believers. The audience response was vicious. Shouting, booing, pure rage directed at the stage. Folk fans felt betrayed, and they weren't subtle about it, but something extraordinary happened in that crucible of hostility. The 5 musicians who had learned to play together in anonymous bars now had to rely on each other completely just to survive the nightly assault. They couldn't hear themselves over the boos. They could only feel each other, locked into a groove so tight that nothing could break it. After the tour ended, they retreated. Not to obscurity, but to a rented house near Woodstock, New York. Here, in isolation, they synthesized everything they'd learned. They moved away from the rockabilly flash of their Ronnie Hawkins days. They rejected the psychedelic excess-dominating radio in 1967's Summer of Love. Instead, they created something quieter, deeper, more rooted in American soil. Songs about work, about history, about the weight of living. In 1968, they released Music from Big Pink. The album only reached number 30 on the charts, but its influence was seismic. This wasn't music designed for commercial success. This was music designed for permanence. The Weight became an instant classic, a song so perfectly crafted it felt like it had always existed. Critics immediately recognized what they were hearing. A new blueprint for American rock. Authentic, honest, timeless. But beneath the communal spirit of Big Pink, a structural decision was made that would haunt them for decades. When it came time to assign songwriting credits, Robbie Robertson's name appeared alone. He was the primary lyricist, the one who put pen to paper under the traditional music industry model. That meant he owned the songs. At the time, surrounded by the Brotherhood they had built, it probably seemed reasonable, but it planted a seed, a small crack in the foundation, and pressure would eventually turn that crack into a chasm. Success didn't arrive loud, it arrived timeless. September 22nd, 1969. The band released their self-titled second album, but everyone called it the Brown Album because of its cover. If Music from Big Pink introduced their sound, the Brown Album perfected it. They recorded it in the pool house of a rented home in the Hollywood Hills. 5 musicians creating dusty Southern history from the heart of California's commercial machine. The irony was perfect. This was their anti-rock star statement, and it resonated with an audience exhausted by excess and hungry for authenticity. The album peaked at number 9 on the Billboard charts and hit number 2 in Canada. But the real impact wasn't commercial. It was cultural songs, like The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down and Up on Cripple Creek weren't just hits. They were pieces of American mythology, stories that felt like they'd been passed down through generations, even though they'd just been written.
Up on Cripple Creek, now she says me.
Up on Cripple Creek became their only United States top 30 single, peaking at number 25. But here's the crucial detail. While the single did moderately well, the album's strength lay in its deep cuts. The songs that weren't designed for radio, but for repeated listening, for contemplation, for the kind of engagement that only happens when you drop the needle on vinyl and let the entire side play. The band's biographer Rob Bowman called it their masterpiece, saying, "Music from Big Pink had been a fine, even superior debut. The band was their masterpiece. Robbie Robertson's songwriting had grown by leaps and bounds. They played Woodstock. They sold out tours. Critics hailed them as musicians. The band other bands studied to understand how rock could grow up without losing its soul. They wore work shirts instead of sequins. They stood still on stage instead of leaping around. They let the music do the talking. For a moment, it seemed like they'd found the balance fame without corruption, success without compromise, a brotherhood intact. But behind the calm surface, pressure was building. The fracture began quietly, not with explosive arguments or public feuds, but with the slow poison of addiction and the corrosive weight of money. 3 of the 5 members, Richard Manuel, Rick Danko, and Levon Helm, descended into substance abuse. Heroin took hold with devastating efficiency. Manuel's immense talent, his 4-octave range and gospel-soaked piano, was described by bandmates as going to waste through his preference for drug and alcohol abuse, which was unbearable to watch. Touring became survival rather than joy. The road that had once forged their bond now exposed its fragility. While Manuel, Danko, and Helm struggled with addiction, Robbie Robertson stayed focused. He used drugs too, but he stayed away from heroin. He prioritized the music and, increasingly, the business. Robertson became the one who put pen to paper and took over captaincy of this boat and steered it to success. From a purely professional standpoint, someone had to. The chaos of addiction meant the other members were becoming unreliable. Robertson's stability gave him leverage, and he used it to consolidate creative control. But this consolidation created what Levon Helm would later call the Great Divide. In his 1993 autobiography, This Wheel's on Fire, Helm laid out his grievance with brutal clarity. Robertson had claimed sole songwriting credit on tracks that were fundamentally collaborative efforts, seizing publishing royalties that should have been shared. For Helm, this was the ultimate betrayal of the democratic spirit they had forged as the Hawks. The legal argument was complex. John Simon, co-producer of their first 2 albums, defended Robertson's approach, explaining that Robertson was working under the old system of songwriting credit. Under this traditional model, the person who provided the finished structural material and lyrics received the credit, regardless of how much the instrumental performances contributed to the final sound. Helm, Simon noted, was understandably upset about that, and wished that Robbie had been working in the new system, where collaboration was recognized with shared credit. But here's the tragic irony. The substance abuse of Manuel, Danko, and Helm gave Robertson the professional justification to take control. If they couldn't be relied upon to show up sober and functional, how could they share equal business responsibility? Robertson's consolidation of power was both a cause and effect of the fracture, a feedback loop that destroyed the Brotherhood from within. The magic had become maintenance. Success no longer felt shared, and the resentment grew in silence, festering beneath every performance, every recording session, every tour stop. The Last Waltz wasn't a celebration, it was a funeral in disguise. November 1976. The Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. Martin Scorsese's cameras rolling to capture what the world believed was a triumphant farewell concert. Guest appearances by Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Neil Young, Joni Mitchell, a who's who of rock royalty gathering to celebrate the band's legacy. But for those on stage, The Last Waltz meant something very different. For Robbie Robertson, it was a necessary exit from the road life that was killing his bandmates, a grand, dignified goodbye. For Levon Helm, it was something else entirely, a public relations launch for Robertson's solo career and the ultimate act of betrayal. Robertson's departure and his control of the publishing rights immediately created severe financial distress for Helm, Danko, and Manuel. Without the substantial royalty income from their biggest hits, they were forced to reform the band and tour relentlessly throughout the 1980s. Out of sheer economic necessity, Helm would later blame Robertson's financial control for Rick Danko's premature death in 1999, attributing it to the overwork required to survive without publishing income. The bitterness in Helm's voice when discussing Robertson became a defining feature of rock journalism for decades, a public airing of wounds that never healed. But the most devastating consequence came in March 1986. Richard Manuel was touring with the reformed band in Florida. The drugs had never released their grip. The financial pressure was relentless. The glory days felt impossibly distant. On March 4th, 1986, in a motel room, Richard Manuel took his own life. Levon Helm was one of the first people on scene. The drummer who'd shared thousands of stages with Manuel, who'd harmonized with his voice, who'd watched his slow descent with helpless horror, now discovering his fatal moment. The immense talent described as unbearable to watch was gone. The Brotherhood had failed to save one of its own. Manuel's death confirmed everything Helm had been saying about the cost of their success. This wasn't just a business dispute anymore. This was tragedy with a body count. The financial injustice continued. Helm declared bankruptcy in 1998 following a cancer diagnosis. His medical bills compounding the financial struggle caused by lost publishing royalties. But Helm's story had one final chapter that offered a measure of redemption. In his final years, he launched the Midnight Ramble Sessions, intimate concerts held in his barn in Woodstock. These shows, raw and honest and rooted in the music he'd always loved, earned him 3 Grammy Awards. He'd come full circle, back to the authenticity that had defined the band in their earliest days. Still, the damage was permanent. The music survived, the relationships didn't. But history isn't written by endings, it's written by legacy. Despite everything, the betrayals, the addictions, the deaths, the decades of bitterness, the music endured more than endured. It grew. The band didn't just participate in rock history. They created the foundational blueprint for modern roots, rock, Americana, and country rock. Their sound, that fusion of Helm's Arkansas drums, Robertson's storytelling, Manuel's gospel piano, Danko's melodic bass, and Hudson's textured organ, can be traced directly through the Eagles, Wilco, Tom Petty, and the Heartbreakers, and dozens of others who followed. Bruce Springsteen, himself a chief architect of American rock narrative, spoke about encountering musicians who shared this roots DNA, describing it as running into a long-lost brother. That kinship, that sense of shared musical ancestry, all traces back to what the band created in those years between 1968 and 1976. The band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1994. The Last Waltz, initially seen as Robertson's betrayal, became regarded as one of the greatest concert films ever made, a document of a moment when American music reached a peak of maturity and soulfulness. And those albums, music from Big Pink and the Brown Album, remain essential. Listening for anyone trying to understand what American rock could be when it stopped trying to be British and started looking inward at its own soil, its own stories, its own ghosts. The narrative of the band poses a question that resonates deeply for anyone who's ever worked closely with others toward a shared dream. What matters more, the fragile bond of brotherhood, or the enduring permanence of the art it produces? Can you separate the beauty of the music from the ugliness of how it ended? Levon Helm, who carried more anger and hurt than anyone, offered an answer in his later years that provides profound closure. He said, "Songs don't wear out. Good songs are good now. If they were a comfort during those hard times in the past, they'll be a comfort in today's age." That sentiment captures the entire story. The Brotherhood was broken by fame and fortune. Richard Manuel died too young. Rick Danko worked himself to death. Levon Helm spent decades carrying bitterness like a stone. But the songs, those timeless, soulful songs, remain a source of comfort, nostalgia, and cultural pride. The music outlived the conflict. What fame broke, music preserved. The band proved that the greatest art often comes from the deepest bonds and the deepest pain. Their story reminds us that success and happiness aren't the same thing, that the music we love often costs more than we'll ever know. But it also reminds us that real art survives everything: betrayal, addiction, even death itself. What's your memory of the band? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's golden age.